The clock on the kitchen wall ticked loudly as Maria watched her 3-year-old twins sleep fitfully on the couch. Elena and Diego had been burning with fever for 6 long days now. Their small bodies were so hot that Maria could feel the heat radiating from them even when she wasn't touching them. She had tried everything: cold washcloths on their foreheads, fever medicine every few hours, plenty of fluids when they would take them. Nothing worked. The fever just kept climbing higher and higher, reaching numbers that made her stomach twist with worry. Maria lived in a small house just outside the San Carlos Apache Reservation in southeastern Arizona. The nearest big hospital was 3 hours away in Tucson, and the local clinic had already done everything they could. Dr. Williams at the reservation clinic had run test after test, but nothing came back with answers. "I've never seen anything quite like this," he had told her yesterday, his face showing the same worry she felt. "The fever should have broken by now with the medication we've given them. I'm going to call Tucson and see if we can get them transferred." But that was yesterday, and the twins were getting worse, not better. They barely opened their eyes now. When they did, they seemed to look right through her, as if they were seeing something she couldn't see. Elena kept mumbling in her sleep about dancing lights while Diego would suddenly sit up and point at empty corners of the room. Maria hadn't slept properly in days. Dark circles ringed her eyes, and her hands shook from too much coffee and not enough rest. She was a teacher at the local elementary school and had always prided herself on being practical and logical. She believed in science and medicine, in things she could see and understand. Her own family came from Mexico originally. Her grandmother had moved to this area 50 years ago, and Maria had grown up here, caught between her Mexican heritage and the Apache community where she worked. She spoke some Apache from years of teaching, and many of the tribal members had become like family to her. But right now, none of that mattered. All that mattered were her babies lying there, burning, up with a fever that wouldn't break. She remembered when the twins were born. They had come early, tiny and fragile, but they had fought hard to survive. The doctor said it was touch and go for the first few weeks, but Elena and Diego proved they were fighters. They grew into healthy, happy children who were always getting into mischief together. Now, looking at them so still and quiet, Maria felt like she was losing them all over again. The phone rang, making her jump. It was her sister calling from Phoenix. "How are they doing?" Anna asked, worry clear in her voice. "Worse," Maria whispered, not wanting to wake the twins. "The fever hit 105 yesterday. Dr. Williams wants to transfer them to Tucson, but I'm scared they're too weak for the trip." "What about that old man you mentioned before? The one whose grandson is in your class?" Maria frowned. "Thomas Crow Feather? What about him? Didn't you say people talk about him being some kind of healer? Maybe he could help?" Maria had heard the stories, of course. Thomas Crow Feather was well known on the reservation. He was a Vietnam veteran who had come back changed, people said. He had spent years learning the old Apache ways from his grandfather and other elders. Some people claimed he could heal sickness that regular doctors couldn't cure, but Maria had never put much stock in those stories. She believed in modern medicine, not old superstitions. Still, as she looked at her children burning up with fever, she felt desperation creeping in. "I don't know, Anna. That sounds crazy. Crazier than watching your babies suffer when nothing else is working?" After hanging up, Maria sat in the growing darkness of her living room. The twins' breathing was shallow and fast. Elena's lips were dry and cracked despite all the fluids Maria had tried to give her. Diego's skin felt like touching a hot stove. She thought about Thomas Crow Feather. His grandson Bobby was in her 3rd grade class, a quiet, serious boy who was always respectful and kind. Thomas would come to school events sometimes, a tall, weathered man with gray braids and eyes that seemed to see everything. He always thanked Maria for teaching Bobby, speaking in a soft voice that commanded respect. The clock chimed 9 o'clock. Outside, the desert was settling into its nighttime rhythm. Coyotes called to each other in the distance. The sound reminded Maria of how alone she felt out here with her sick children. She made a decision that surprised her. Standing up on shaky legs, she walked to the phone and called her neighbor, Mrs. Santos. "Could you come sit with the twins for a little while?" There's something I need to do. 30 minutes later, Maria found herself walking down the dusty road toward Thomas Crowfeather's house. The night air was cool against her face, a sharp contrast to the heat that had been radiating from her children. Stars filled the desert, sky above more stars than you could ever see in a city. Thomas's house was modest, like most homes on the reservation. A single light glowed in the front window. Maria hesitated at the gate, suddenly feeling foolish. What was she doing here? She didn't even believe in traditional healing. She was a school teacher, for crying out loud. She believed in science and reason. But then she thought about Elena and Diego lying there so still, and she pushed open the gate. Her knock was answered quickly, as if Thomas had been expecting her. He stood in the doorway, his weathered face showing no surprise at seeing her there so late. "Mrs. Gonzalez," he said simply. "Your children are very sick." It wasn't a question. Somehow he already knew. Maria felt tears spring to her eyes. All the fear and exhaustion of the past week came pouring out. "They're dying," she whispered. "The doctors can't help them. Their fever won't break. I don't know what to do anymore." Thomas stepped aside and gestured for her to come in. His living room was simple but comfortable, decorated with beautiful Native American artwork and family photos. The smell of sage hung lightly in the air. "Sit down," he said gently. "Tell me about their sickness." Maria found herself pouring out everything. How the fever had started suddenly 6 days ago, how it kept getting higher no matter what medicine they took, how the children seemed to be seeing things that weren't there, how they mumbled words in their sleep that she couldn't understand. Thomas listened without interrupting, his dark eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, he sat quietly for a long moment. "Some sickness comes from the body," he said finally. "Some sickness comes from the spirit. Your children's sickness is not from the body." Maria felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean?" "The mountain spirits are calling them. This happens sometimes with children who are meant for something special. The fever is a test, a way of seeing if they are strong enough for what lies ahead." Despite everything, Maria felt a flash of her old skepticism. "That sounds crazy?" Thomas's eyes crinkled slightly. "Yes, I imagine it does to someone who lives in both worlds like you do. But tell me, Mrs. Gonzalez, has your medicine worked?" Maria shook her head, fresh tears starting. "Then maybe it's time to try another way." Thomas stood up and walked to a cabinet, pulling out a small leather pouch. "I will help your children, but you must understand something. This is not like taking them to a doctor. You cannot stand back and watch. You must believe, or the spirits will not listen." Maria stared at him. Everything logical in her mind was screaming that this was foolish, but everything in her heart as a mother was telling her to try anything at all to save her babies. "What would you need to do?" she asked quietly. "There is a ceremony. It must be done tonight, while the spirits are still listening. I will need to bring others with me. This is not something one person can do alone." Maria thought about Elena and Diego lying at home, their small bodies fighting a battle she couldn't help them win. She thought about the helpless look on Dr. Williams's face. She thought about the long, scary drive to Tucson with children who might not survive the trip. "Okay," she whispered. "Please help them." Thomas nodded solemnly. "Go home to your children. Keep them comfortable. I will gather the others and we will come before midnight." As Maria walked home under the star-filled sky, she felt something she hadn't felt in days. A tiny spark of hope. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe she was grasping at straws. But maybe, just maybe, there were forces in this world that she didn't understand. Forces that could help her children when everything else had failed. Thomas Crowfeather sat in his kitchen after Maria left, staring at the old photograph on his table. It showed him as a young man in military uniform, standing next to his grandfather, Joseph Crowfeather, who wore traditional Apache clothing. That picture was taken right before Thomas shipped out to Vietnam in 1969. He had been so different then. Young, angry, eager to prove himself in the white man's world. The reservation had felt too small, too old-fashioned. He wanted adventure, wanted to see the world beyond the desert mountains of Arizona. Vietnam changed all that. Thomas had seen things in the jungle that no young man should see. He had watched friends die in his arms. He had survived battles that should have killed him. And through it all, he had started having dreams. Dreams of his grandfather calling to him. Dreams of the sacred mountains of his homeland. Dreams of dancing spirits that seemed more real than the war around him. When he came home in 1971, he was a broken man. He drank too much, fought too much, couldn't hold a job. The nightmares from Vietnam mixed with strange visions that he couldn't explain. For 2 years, he wandered lost between two worlds, the modern world that had sent him to war, and the traditional world he had tried to leave behind. His salvation came from an unexpected source. His grandfather Joseph, now in his 80s, showed up at Thomas's rundown apartment one morning. "Grandson," the old man said simply, "it's time to come home." Thomas wanted to argue, wanted to say he was fine on his own, but looking into his grandfather's wise old eyes, he knew he wasn't fooling anyone. Joseph took Thomas up into the sacred mountains to places where the Apache had practiced their ceremonies for hundreds of years. For 6 months they lived the old way. No electricity, no modern conveniences. Just grandfather and grandson, alone with the spirits of the land. "The visions you're having," Joseph explained one night as they sat by a small fire, "they're not from the war. The war just opened your spirit eyes. You've always been able to see between worlds. That's why the spirits called you home." Slowly, patiently, Joseph began teaching Thomas the old ways. How to read signs in nature. How to communicate with the mountain spirits called the Gan. How to perform ceremonies that could heal sickness of both body and spirit. How to understand that some children are chosen by the spirits for special purposes. The spirits don't choose the strong ones, Joseph taught him. They choose the ones who can survive being broken and put back together. Like you, grandson. Like the children who will come to you someday. Thomas learned that the Gan, the mountain spirits, were protectors of the Apache people. They appeared as dancers wearing elaborate masks, and they could be called upon in times of great need. But they demanded respect, demanded belief, demanded that people be willing to walk in both the old world and the new. Now, 30 years later, Thomas understood why his grandfather had spent so much time teaching him about children's sickness. Children, Joseph had explained, were closer to the spirit world than adults. Sometimes the spirits would call to special children, testing them to see if they were strong enough for an important purpose. "You'll know them when you see them," Joseph had said. "Their sickness won't respond to regular medicine. They'll have visions. They'll speak words they've never learned. And their mothers will be desperate enough to come looking for help they don't understand." Thomas smiled slightly, remembering those words as he thought about Maria's visit tonight. She was exactly the kind of mother Joseph had described, caught between worlds herself, practical and educated, but desperate enough to try anything for her children. He picked up his phone and dialed his sister Rose first. "Thomas?" Rose's voice was alert despite the late hour. She had always been able to sense when something important was happening. "I need you, sister. There are 2 children who need our help tonight. Can you gather the sacred items and meet me at the Gonzalez house in an hour?" Rose didn't ask questions. In their family, when someone said children needed help, you dropped everything. "I'll bring the sage and sweetgrass. Should I call James?" James was Rose's son, Thomas's nephew, a man in his 30s who had been learning the traditional ways. "Yes, bring James and call Robert White Eagle too. We'll need 4 for this ceremony." After hanging up with Rose, Thomas walked to his bedroom and opened an old wooden chest that had belonged to his grandfather. Inside were the sacred items he would need tonight. Eagle feathers blessed by generations of healers, white clay, mixed with water from a sacred spring, and most importantly, the drum. The drum was over 100 years old, made from elk hide by Thomas's great-great-grandfather. It had been used in healing ceremonies for 5 generations. When Thomas held it, he could almost hear the voices of all the healers who had used it before him. He also pulled out a small leather pouch containing pollen from sacred plants. This would be used to create the symbols that would call the mountain spirits. As he gathered these items, Thomas thought about what he had observed in Maria's children. Bobby, his grandson, had mentioned that Elena and Diego sometimes seemed to know things they shouldn't know. Bobby had told him about the time Elena warned everyone to stay inside because the sky spirits were angry, just minutes before a sudden violent thunderstorm hit. Diego had once found an injured baby bird and somehow knew exactly how to care for it until it could fly again. These weren't normal childhood behaviors. These were signs that the children were already connected to the spirit world in ways most people never experienced. The phone rang again. It was Robert White Eagle, an elder who lived on the other side of the reservation. "Thomas, I was just dreaming about dancing lights and crying mothers. Rose called and said you need me tonight." "The mountain spirits are calling 2 children. Robert, we need to answer before it's too late." "I'll be there." Thomas loaded his truck with the sacred items and drove slowly toward Maria's house. The desert night was beautiful, with a full moon casting silver light across the landscape. He could feel the presence of the spirits tonight. They were close, waiting to see what would happen. When he pulled up to Maria's house, he could see lights on in every window. Rose, James, and Robert were already there, standing quietly in the front yard with their own sacred items. Maria opened the door before they could knock. Her face was pale with worry, but Thomas could see determination in her eyes too. "How are they?" he asked gently. "Worse. The fever hit 106 about an hour ago. Mrs. Santos is with them now." Thomas nodded and gestured for the others to follow him inside. When they entered the living room, he immediately felt the spiritual energy in the room. It was heavy, charged, like the air before a thunderstorm. Elena and Diego lay on the couch, their small bodies radiating heat. But Thomas could see something else, a faint shimmer in the air around them, visible only to eyes trained to see such things. The mountain spirits were indeed calling these children. Mrs. Santos, an elderly woman who lived next door, looked relieved to see them arrive. She had been holding cold cloths to the children's foreheads, but her face showed that she knew regular remedies weren't working. "Thank you for staying with them," Maria told her neighbor. Mrs. Santos nodded and quietly left, understanding that what was about to happen was not for outsiders to witness. Thomas approached the couch and knelt beside the twins. Elena's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment she looked directly at him. "The dancing man," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're the dancing man from my dreams." Thomas felt his heart skip. This was exactly what his grandfather had taught him to listen for. Children who could see the spirits before the hay ceremony even began. He turned to Maria, who was standing nearby with tears in her eyes. "Your daughter just confirmed what I suspected," he said softly. "The mountain spirits have been visiting them in their dreams. They are being called for a special purpose. But first, they must prove they are strong enough to survive this trial." Maria wiped her eyes. "What kind of purpose?" "Children like yours become bridges," Rose spoke up, her voice gentle but serious. "They help different peoples understand each other. They heal divisions that have lasted for generations. But first, the spirits must see if they have the strength for such important work." Thomas began unpacking his sacred items, arranging them carefully on Maria's coffee table. The drum, the eagle feathers, the sacred clay, the pollen, each item had been blessed and used by generations of healers. "Maria," Thomas said, looking at her directly, "what happens next will seem strange to you. We will sing songs in Apache that are hundreds of years old. We will call upon spirits you cannot see. We will ask the mountain dancers, the gone, to release your children from this trial." He paused, studying her face. "But you must participate. You cannot just watch. The spirits will only listen if they see that the children's mother truly believes in what we're doing." Maria looked at her burning children, then at the 4 Apache people who had come to help her in the middle of the night. Everything in her logical mind told her this was impossible, but everything in her heart told her these people were her last hope. "Tell me what I need to do," she said firmly. The sound of the ancient drum filled Maria's small living room like a heartbeat. Thomas held it carefully, his weathered hands moving in a steady rhythm that seemed to echo from deep within the earth itself. The drum had been made over a century ago, and Maria could almost feel the weight of all the ceremonies it had witnessed. Rose began burning sage in a small clay bowl, the sweet smoke curling up toward the ceiling. The smell was unlike anything Maria had experienced, earthy and clean, like the desert after rain. James and Robert stood at opposite ends of the room, each holding eagle feathers that had been passed down through their families for generations. Rikau. Spirits are gathering, Thomas said quietly, his voice barely audible over the drum. I can feel them coming down from the sacred mountains. Maria stood near her children, her hands trembling. Elena and Diego looked even smaller now, surrounded by these powerful people calling upon forces she didn't understand. Their fever hadn't broken. If anything, they seemed to be burning even hotter. What you're going to see and hear tonight, Rose explained gently to Maria, has been done the same way for hundreds of years. Our ancestors used these same songs, these same movements to call the gone when children were in spiritual danger. Thomas began to sing in Apache, his voice deep and resonant. The words were unlike anything Maria had ever heard, flowing like water over stones, rising and falling with an ancient rhythm. James and Robert joined in, their voices blending together in harmonies that seemed to make the very air shimmer. As the singing continued, Maria noticed something strange happening to the light in the room. The electric lamp seemed to dim, while the candles Rose had lit began to glow brighter, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The temperature in the room shifted too, cooler where the adults stood, but still burning hot around the twins. The children are fighting, Thomas explained during a brief pause in the singing. Their spirits are being pulled between this world and the world of the mountain dancers. We need to help them choose to stay here with us. He approached Elena and Diego with the small bowl of sacred clay mixed with spring water. Very carefully, he painted symbols on each child's forehead, circles and lines that represented protection and spiritual strength. The clay was cool against their burning skin. Diego stirred slightly when Thomas touched his forehead, his eyes opening just enough to look around the room. But instead of looking at the people standing there, his gaze went to the empty corners as if he was seeing things the adults couldn't see. There, Diego whispered, his voice hoarse from days of fever. The dancers are there. Maria felt her heart stop. She looked where Diego was pointing, but saw only shadows and flickering candlelight. Yet all 4 Apache people turned to look. In the same direction, their faces showing recognition. Yes, little one, Rose said softly. The mountain dancers are here, but you don't have to go with them tonight. You can stay here with your mother. The ceremony continued for hours. Thomas, Rose, James, and Robert took turns singing different songs, each one calling to the spirits in a different way. Some songs were gentle, almost like lullabies, asking the gone to be merciful to such young children. Others were stronger, more demanding, insisting that the twins belonged in the world of the living. Throughout it all, Maria found herself drawn into the rhythm. At first, she felt awkward and out of place, not knowing the words or the meanings. But gradually, she began to understand that her role wasn't to know everything. It was to believe, to add her mother's love to the spiritual power these people were calling upon. Hold your children, Thomas instructed her during one of the bar songs. Let them feel your strength. Maria carefully lifted Elena onto her lap, then pulled Diego close beside her. Their small bodies were so hot they almost burned her hands, but she held them tight, whispering her own prayers in Spanish, adding her voice to the Apache words filling the room. As she held them, something extraordinary began to happen. Elena, who had been unconscious for hours, began to speak. But she wasn't speaking Spanish or English. She was speaking Apache, words she had never learned in a voice that seemed older than her 3 years. She's talking to them, James said with wonder. She's actually talking to the mountain spirits. Maria couldn't understand the words, but she could hear the conversation happening. Elena would speak in Apache, then pause as if listening to someone, then respond again. It was like watching a child have a phone conversation with someone only she could hear. Diego joined in, his tiny voice also speaking Apache words that should have been impossible for him to know. The two children seemed to be talking to the same invisible presence, sometimes agreeing with each other, sometimes arguing like any siblings would. "What are they saying?" Maria asked, tears streaming down her face. Thomas listened carefully before answering. "The spirits are asking them to come dance with them in the sacred places. Your children are explaining that they need to stay here, that their mother needs them, that they have work to do in this world first." The conversation between the children and the spirits went on for nearly an hour. Sometimes Elena and Diego would look directly at empty spaces in the room and nod their heads. Other times they would shake their heads firmly as if refusing something. Finally, Elena turned to look directly at Thomas. In perfect Apache, she said something that made all four adults gasp. "What did she say?" Maria asked urgently. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his face showing amazement. She said, "We will serve as bridges between the peoples, but we choose to do it from this side of the mountain. Tell our mother the fever will break when the sun rises." As if responding to her words, Diego opened his eyes fully for the first time in days. He looked around the room, taking in all the people, all the sacred items, all the flickering candles. Then he looked up at his mother. "Mama," he said in English, his voice weak but clear. "I'm thirsty." Maria felt hope flood through her chest. Diego asking for water was the first normal thing either child had done in a week. With shaking hands, she gave him small sips from a cup, watching as he drank eagerly. Elena also began to wake up more fully, though she seemed confused about where she was and why there were so many people in their living room. "The fever is starting to break," Rose observed, touching Elena's forehead gently. "I can feel the heat leaving her." Thomas nodded, but his expression remained serious. "The immediate danger is passing, but this is just the beginning for these children. The mountain spirits have accepted them as bridge walkers. They will have gifts, but also responsibilities." He turned to Maria, his dark eyes intense. "Your children will see things other people cannot see. They will know things they haven't been taught. They will be able to help people in ways that seem impossible, but they will also need guidance to understand their gifts." Maria looked down at her twins, who were both drinking water now and beginning to show interest in their surroundings. The difference from just hours ago was miraculous. They were clearly on the path to recovery. "What kind of guidance?" she asked. "They will need to learn our ways," James explained. "Not to replace what you teach them, but to help them understand what happened to them tonight. Children who have been called by the mountain spirits often struggle if they don't have people who can explain their experiences." Rose added, "It would be good if they could spend time with elders who understand these things. Maybe come to ceremony sometimes, learn some of our language, understand the stories that connect them to the spirits who saved them." Maria felt a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. These people had saved her children's lives through methods she still didn't fully understand. But accepting their offer of continued guidance would mean major changes in how she raised Elena and Diego. As the ceremony wound down, the four Apache people began packing up their sacred items. The drum went back into its soft leather case. The eagle feathers were wrapped carefully in cloth. The remaining sage was given to Maria to burn in her house whenever she felt the need for spiritual cleansing. "The hardest part is over," Thomas assured her as he prepared to leave. "But remember, your children are different now. They've been touched by the mountain spirits. They may say things that surprise you, know things they shouldn't know, see things you cannot see. This is normal for children who have been called." Just as Thomas predicted, as the first rays of sunlight began to creep through Maria's windows, both twins' fevers finally broke completely. Their skin cooled to normal temperature, their breathing became deep and regular, and they fell into the first peaceful sleep they had experienced in a week. Maria sat beside them as the Apache people prepared to go home, watching the gentle rise and fall of her children's chests. They looked like normal sleeping children again, but she knew nothing would ever be quite the same. "Thank you," she said to Thomas, Rose, James, and Robert as they prepared to leave. I don't know how to repay you for what you've done. Thomas smiled gently. There is no debt to repay. The mountain spirits called and we answered. But remember what I told you. This is just the beginning. Your children will need our continued guidance as... Maria woke up on her living room floor at 7 in the morning, stiff from sleeping in an awkward position beside the couch. For a moment she wondered if the entire night had been some kind of fever dream brought on by exhaustion and worry. But then she smelled the lingering sage in the air and saw the small bowl of white clay still sitting on her coffee table. It had really happened. She looked over at Elena and Diego, afraid of what she might find. Both children were sleeping peacefully, their breathing slow and steady. When she touched their foreheads, their skin felt cool and normal for the first time in a week. The fever had broken, exactly as Elena had promised in her strange conversation with the mountain spirits. Elena stirred first, opening her eyes and looking around with the confused expression of someone waking up in an unfamiliar place. She seemed surprised to find herself on the living room couch instead of in her bed. "Mama," she said, her voice hoarse but stronger than it had been in days. "Why are we sleeping in here, and why does it smell funny?" Maria felt tears of relief spring to her eyes. Elena sounded like a normal 3-year-old again, not like the feverish child who had been speaking Apache to invisible spirits just hours before. "You've been sick, baby," Maria explained, helping Elena sit up. "Do you remember anything about last night?" Elena frowned, thinking hard. "I remember the dancing man with feathers. He was nice and there was singing." She paused, looking puzzled. "But it feels like a dream now." Diego woke up a few minutes later, also seeming confused about where he was. Unlike Elena, though, he seemed to remember more of what had happened. "Where are the people who were singing?" he asked, looking around the empty room. "And where are the dancers in the corners?" "What dancers, sweetheart?" Maria asked gently. Diego pointed to the corner where he had seen the mountain spirits, the tall ones with the pretty masks. "They were dancing, but they looked sad. I told them we wanted to stay with you instead of going with them." Maria felt a chill run down her spine. Diego was describing exactly what Thomas had said. The mountain spirits had been calling the children, trying to take them to the spirit world, but the twins had chosen to stay with her instead. Over the next few days, as Elena and Diego regained their strength, Maria began to notice the changes that Thomas had warned her about. They were subtle at first. The children seemed more aware of their surroundings, more sensitive to things happening around them. Elena would look up from playing and say, "Someone's coming to visit," just minutes before Maria's sister would arrive unexpectedly. Diego developed an uncanny ability to know when storms were approaching, even when the sky looked clear. But the most dramatic change happened 4 days after the ceremony. Maria was in her backyard hanging laundry when she heard Diego calling excitedly from the front yard. "Mama! Mama! Come quick! The bird is hurt!" She hurried around to the front of the house and found Diego kneeling beside a small desert hawk that had apparently flown into her front window. The bird was lying on the ground, one wing bent at an odd angle, breathing rapidly but unable to move. "We have to help it," Diego said urgently. "It's scared and it hurts." Before Maria could explain that wild hawks were dangerous and should be left alone, Diego had gently picked up the injured bird. Instead of struggling or trying to bite him, the hawk became completely calm in his small hands. "It's okay," Diego whispered to the bird. "I won't hurt you." To Maria's amazement, Diego seemed to know exactly what to do. He carefully examined the bird's wing, his little fingers moving with surprising gentleness and confidence. Then he began to sing, not in English or Spanish, but in Apache, words he had never been taught but somehow knew. As he sang, the strangest thing happened. The hawk's breathing became slower and calmer. The bird stopped struggling and seemed to relax completely in Diego's hands. After about 10 minutes, Diego set the hawk down on the ground and stepped back. The bird shook itself, spread both wings, including the one that had been injured, and flew away as if nothing had ever been wrong. "Diego," Maria said carefully, "where did you learn to do that?" Diego looked up at her with his 3-year-old eyes that suddenly seemed much older. The mountain people taught me. They said I could help herd animals if I sang the right songs. That same week, Elena demonstrated her own new abilities. She began predicting things with startling accuracy, not just visitors, but weather changes, phone calls even when their car was going to have problems. She also started understanding Apache when she heard it spoken, even though Maria was sure she had never been exposed to the language beyond casual words. The most unsettling incident happened during a trip to the grocery store. Elena had been quiet in the shopping cart, but as they passed through the produce section, she suddenly became agitated. "Mama, we need to go home now," she said urgently. "Why, sweetheart? We're not done shopping yet. The house is sad. Something bad happened there and it needs us to come home." Maria felt that familiar chill. Elena's tone was so serious, so certain. Against her better judgment, she abandoned her shopping and drove home quickly. When they arrived, they found their elderly neighbor, Mr. Rodriguez, sitting on his front porch looking distressed. His old dog, Cisco, had died suddenly while they were gone. The man was clearly heartbroken and had been hoping to talk to someone about it. Elena immediately went to Mr. Rodriguez and hugged his legs. "I'm sorry about Cisco," she said gently, "but he's not hurting anymore. He's running with the spirit dogs now." Mr. Rodriguez looked down at her with surprise and tears in his eyes. "How did you know about Cisco, little one?" Elena just smiled sadly and patted his hand. "The house told me you were sad." Later that evening, after the children were in bed, Maria called Thomas Crow Feather. She needed to understand what was happening to her twins. "The changes you're describing are normal," Thomas assured her when she told him about the hawk and Elena's predictions. "Children who have been called by the mountain spirits often develop these gifts. Diego will be a healer. The spirits have given him the ability to help injured animals and maybe people too. Elena has been blessed with sight. She can see things that are hidden from most people." "But Thomas," Maria said, "they're only 3 years old. How can they handle having abilities like this?" "That's why they need guidance," he replied gently. "Would you consider bringing them to visit me sometimes? I can help them understand their gifts, teach them how to use them wisely. Without proper guidance, children with spiritual gifts can become confused or frightened by what they experience." Maria thought about this for several days. Everything rational in her mind told her this was too strange, too far from the normal life she had planned for her children. But every day, she saw new evidence that Elena and Diego were indeed different, now that they had been touched by something beyond her understanding. The decision was made for her the following week when Diego healed another animal, this time a neighbor's sick cat that had been dying. The cat's owner, Mrs. Chen, was amazed when her pet suddenly recovered after Diego spent an afternoon singing to it in Apache. Word began to spread quietly through both the Hispanic and Apache communities about Maria's twins and their unusual abilities. People started coming to her house, asking if Diego could help their sick animals, or if Elena could give them insight into problems they were facing. Maria realized she was completely out of her depth. These people were looking to her 3-year-old children for help with things she didn't understand. She needed guidance just as much as Elena and Diego did. She called Thomas again. "I think I need to accept your offer," she told him. "But I need to understand something first. When you talked about the children being bridge walkers, what exactly did you mean?" Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Children like yours are born to help different peoples understand each other. They walk comfortably in both worlds, your world and ours. They can help heal the divisions that have existed between our communities for generations. But how? They're just babies." "They won't stay babies," Thomas reminded her. "As they grow, their gifts will grow too. Elena will become someone people turn to for wisdom and guidance. Diego will become a healer who can help both people and animals. But most importantly, they will help our people see that we are not so different after all." Maria felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She had wanted to raise her children to be successful in the modern world, to get good educations and have comfortable lives. Now she was learning that they had been chosen for a different kind of purpose entirely. "What would it mean if I brought them to you for guidance?" she asked. It would mean accepting that your children are part of both worlds now. They would learn our language, our ceremonies, our stories. They would understand where their gifts come from and how to use them responsibly. But Maria, his voice became very serious. Once you start down this path, there's no going back. Your children will always be connected to the mountain spirits. Maria looked out her window at Elena and Diego playing in the backyard. As she watched, Elena suddenly looked up at the sky and pointed. "Look, Diego, the spirits are dancing in the clouds." 6 months after the night that changed everything, Maria found herself packing boxes in a house that no longer felt like home. The small place where she had raised Elena and Diego as babies now felt too removed from the life they were meant to live. Thomas Crow Feather had offered her a house on the reservation proper. Not charity, but a trade. Her teaching skills were desperately needed at the tribal school, and the children's spiritual education would be easier if they lived among people who understood their gifts. It hadn't been an easy decision. Moving to the reservation meant leaving, behind the life Maria had carefully built, the plans she had made for her family's future. But every day brought new evidence that Elena and Diego needed more guidance than she could provide alone. Just last week, Diego had healed a horse that, the veterinarian said, would have to be put down. The week before that, Elena had warned 3 families about a flash flood that would have caught them in their cars if they hadn't listened to her. The children's abilities were growing stronger, but they were also becoming more confused about why they were different from other kids. "Mama," Elena had asked just a few days ago, "why can I see the sad spirits around Mrs. Martinez, but she can't see them herself?" Maria had no answer for questions like that, but Thomas did. The moving truck arrived on a bright Saturday morning, in October. Elena and Diego watched with excitement as their belongings were loaded up. They had been visiting Thomas regularly for months now, learning Apache words and stories, and they loved the reservation. To them, this move felt like an adventure. "Will we live near the mountain spirits now?" Diego asked as his toys were packed into boxes. "The mountain spirits are everywhere," Maria explained, repeating what Thomas had taught her. "But yes, we'll be living closer to the places they call home." Their new house was modest but comfortable, with a view of the sacred mountains where Thomas had first learned the old ways from his grandfather. It came with something even more valuable, a community of people who understood what Elena and Diego were experiencing. Rose Crow Feather, Thomas's sister, lived just down the street. She had become like a grandmother to the twins, teaching them traditional songs and helping them understand their dreams. James, Thomas's nephew, often took Diego out to observe animals in their natural habitat, teaching him how to communicate with them properly. The transition wasn't without challenges. Some people in both communities didn't understand why Maria was raising her children in Apache traditions when she wasn't Apache herself. A few teachers at her old school thought she was making a mistake by encouraging superstition in her children. But Thomas helped her understand that bridge walkers always faced criticism from people who were afraid of change. "Your children are meant to show people that our ways can work together," he explained one evening as they watched Elena and Diego play with other reservation children. "Some people won't like that message at first, but eventually they'll see the wisdom in it." The first sign that Thomas was right came during Elena's first week at the tribal elementary school. She was the only non-Apache child in her class, and some of the other kids weren't sure what to make of her at first. But when little Bobby Yazzie fell off the playground equipment and scraped his knee badly, Elena immediately went to help him. She sang softly in Apache while she helped clean his wound, and the scrape healed unusually quickly with no scarring. "How did you learn that song?" Bobby asked her, amazed. "The mountain spirits taught it to me," Elena replied matter-of-factly. Word of the incident spread quickly through the school and the broader community. Elena wasn't just a Mexican girl learning Apache ways. She was a child who had been blessed by the mountain spirits themselves. The other children began to accept her not as an outsider, but as someone special who belonged among them. Diego's integration was even more dramatic. Within a month of starting school, he had helped heal a sick classroom rabbit, predicted which days it would rain so the children could prepare for indoor recess, and somehow convinced a family of wild deer to visit the school playground where the students could observe them safely. His teacher, an elderly Apache woman named Catherine Begay, told Maria she had never seen anything like it. "That boy has a gift I haven't seen in 40 years of teaching," she said. "The animals trust him completely. But more than that, he's teaching the other children to respect nature in ways I never could with just words." As the school year progressed, something wonderful began to happen. Elena and Diego's presence started bringing the Hispanic and Apache communities together in ways that hadn't occurred in decades. When Diego healed the beloved horse of a Hispanic rancher who lived near the reservation, the man was so grateful that he offered to provide free horseback riding lessons for Apache children. When Elena helped an Apache elder find her missing wedding ring by somehow sensing where it had fallen, the woman's family invited Maria to participate in a traditional blessing ceremony. Small bridges of understanding began forming between people who had lived as neighbors for generations but had rarely interacted meaningfully. Thomas watched these developments with deep satisfaction. "This is exactly what the mountain spirits intended," he told Maria. "Your children are showing both communities that we have more in common than we have differences." The most significant change came when Maria proposed a new program at the school, a cultural exchange where Apache elders would teach traditional knowledge alongside regular academic subjects, while Hispanic families would share their own cultural traditions. At first, there was resistance from both sides. Some Apache people worried about sharing sacred knowledge with outsiders. Some Hispanic families didn't understand why their children needed to learn Indian ways. But Elena and Diego became living examples of how the two cultures could blend beautifully. Elena could speak fluent Apache and Spanish, could predict weather patterns using traditional signs, and could also excel in modern mathematics and reading. Diego could heal animals using ancient songs, communicate with wild creatures and also build impressive projects with Legos, and solve puzzles designed for much older children. The cultural exchange program started small, with just a few families participating. Thomas, Rose, and several other elders agreed to teach traditional skills like plant identification, weather reading, and animal communication. In return, Hispanic families shared their knowledge of farming techniques, cooking traditions, and storytelling methods. The children who participated in the program began to develop the same kind of balanced perspective that Elena and Diego possessed. They learned to value both traditional wisdom and modern education, to respect both the spiritual world and the practical world. Within 2 years, the program had grown so successful that it attracted attention from education officials throughout Arizona. Delegations came from other schools to observe how the cultural exchange was working, and several similar programs were started in other communities. Elena and Diego, now 5 years old, had become celebrities of sorts. But Thomas was careful to make sure the attention didn't go to their heads. "Your gifts are not for showing off," he reminded them regularly. "They're for helping people. Remember that the mountain spirits chose you to serve others, not to make yourselves famous." The children took this responsibility seriously. Elena used her ability to sense people's emotions to help teachers understand when students were struggling with problems at home. Diego's healing abilities extended beyond animals. He somehow knew how to comfort other children when they were hurt or scared. But perhaps most importantly, they served as living proof that different cultures could not only coexist, but could actually strengthen each other. Maria often marveled at how much her life had changed from that desperate night when she first approached Thomas Crowfeather. She had been a single mother trying to save her children with no resources left except hope. Now she was part of a community that embraced both her heritage and her children's spiritual gifts. She had also discovered her own calling. In addition to teaching at the tribal school, she began working as a cultural liaison, helping other families who were struggling to understand traditional healing practices. When Apache families needed to navigate modern healthcare systems, she helped them advocate for their needs. When Hispanic families wanted to learn more about Native American traditions, she helped them find respectful ways to do so. Thomas often said that Maria had become as much of a bridge walker as her children. 3 years after the night of the healing ceremony, Thomas Crowfeather received a phone call that brought tears to his eyes. It was from Dr. Williams, the physician at the reservation clinic who had been unable to help Elena and Diego during their mysterious illness. Thomas, Dr. Williams said, "I've been watching what's happened with the Gonzalez family and I need to tell you something. In 30 years of practicing medicine, I've never seen anything like what happened to those children. Their recovery was medically impossible." He paused, then continued. "But more than that, I've never seen two children have such a positive impact on their entire community. Whatever happened that night you went to help them, it wasn't just about healing.